Premier Horgan, nice to see you.
Good to see you, Rosemary.
I want to talk about healthcare. I want to talk about COVID restrictions, obviously, but I obviously want to start with events as they have unfolded in the nation's capital over the past number of days, and specifically the use of the Emergencies Act. That was discussed with the Prime Minister and other premiers last week, and I wonder what your opinion was at the time and how that conversation went.
Well, it was, of course, it's a very difficult time for the people of Ottawa. During the week leading up to events on Friday, of course, there were events at border crossings, particularly focusing on the Ambassador Bridge in Ontario. We had the Coots events in Alberta, as well as disruptions in Manitoba and attempts to disrupt border crossings here in British Columbia. So that was the backdrop of the Prime Minister's call to all of us. And to a person, I think the premiers agreed that the events in Ottawa were just not tenable and something had to be done. But at the same time, we all expressed our concerns about the intrusion into provincial jurisdiction. We all expressed a concern that it be a locally focused, geographically focused. Certainly, particularly Premier Legault was adamant about that, as were others across the country. But there was a consensus, I believe, and of course everyone can speak for themselves, that the events in Ottawa were disrupting our national life and were really quite beyond what we would expect to be legitimate civil discontent. I come from a party that was fostered and founded on discontent, and so I've been to more protests than I can count. But I also recall at the end of all of those, you went home and you looked at how you could activate your point of view in a way that encouraged people to join your cause rather than discouraging people. And that's what was happening in Ottawa, and it needed to be addressed, and the federal government took the action it took, and I'll leave it to them to defend it.
Do you have any concerns around the precedent it sets? And I don't mean to make this comparison, but there was that violent attack, very violent criminal attack at the Coastal GasLink pipeline. We don't know if it was protesters. We don't know who was behind it. But I wonder if you're concerned that this sets a precedent for dealing with these kinds of things.
Well, first of all, I think we need to separate the events in Ottawa, where it was clearly people looking for a political outcome. They were unhappy with policies, and they took steps to have their voices heard. What happened in northern British Columbia was a violent criminal act. People's lives were put at risk as a result of that violent criminal act. And I think we do a disservice to the many men and women and people across Canada, not just today, but in our history, and those who will come after us, to legitimately put forward disagreements in the public square in a way that will try and encourage people to adopt that point of view. Destroying property, violently attacking people is something completely different. And I think all Canadians understand that. And they also are saying to themselves, Rosemary, and I know you are, what's happened in the past number of years that has led a peaceful, compassionate country like Canada to have such bizarre events taking place. And I attribute it largely to the after effects of COVID and 2 years of uncertainty within our personal lives, within our communities, and across the country. But that is not a justification for criminal violence, nor is it a justification, quite frankly, for taking hostage a community, as happened in Ottawa.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about COVID then. That's ostensibly where this movement, this protest came from. But in British Columbia, you have decided to remove restrictions, many health measures this week, not all of them. And you've made it quite plain that this is a policy decision and not related to protests. Were you concerned that people would try and make that connection? And how did you explain it to people in BC?
Well, I wasn't concerned because we've been pretty clear on the Omicron wave when we brought in reactivated restrictions in terms of personal gatherings, restaurants, hockey games, and so on, indoor gatherings, that this was a temporary measure so we could understand the consequences of Omicron. This was a new phenomenon across not just Canada, but around the world. And my health minister and Dr. Bonnie Henry, who has been leading the public engagement with British Columbians from the beginning, made it clear in early January that we would revisit the restrictions before the family day-long weekend, which we did. And so anyone who had been paying attention understood that this was not a reaction to people honking their horns, but instead was a reaction, as we have done from the beginning, to the science and to the impact on our public healthcare system in terms of hospitalizations, ICU beds being available, and so on.
And why are you keeping vaccine passports and masking in place right now? I think the masking, perhaps I understand, but it does seem as though provinces are moving, other provinces are moving to get rid of the vaccine passports quickly.
They are, and again, we're charting our own course. Dr. Henry's counsel and the information that we've been able to look at through communities, through businesses that are using the vaccine card, is that it gives some comfort to their clients or their patrons that the people around them have taken the same steps to protect themselves. They don't want it to be here forever, but they'll take guidance from Dr. Henry and the government into the next month or two, and we'll see how it goes. But we left it in place because it was what the public wanted.
Every time you're here, I ask you about healthcare funding because you are the head of the Council of the Federation, and it remains an issue that I don't think it has seen much resolution. You have asked the Prime Minister for a meeting. You wanted that sort of finalized and put aside. I don't know whether it came up when you last spoke with him, but where is the status of that conversation? Because it doesn't seem to be getting a lot of traction or movement from this end anyway.
Well, we have been making progress. We need to reduce wait times. We need to bring more personnel, doctors, nurses, nurse practitioners, care aides into our system to provide the services that people expect. And the Prime Minister agrees with that. The Finance Minister agrees with that. The challenge has been, when is the right time to have that conversation? And when the Prime Minister was here in British Columbia in early December, we talked about his concerns about the CHT and how that would play in a country that is as diverse and different as Canada. The issues in the Maritimes are not the issues in Saskatchewan and so on. And we all agree on that. But I think I made the case fairly effectively that the Prime Minister wanted to ensure that health officials and finance officials had a full understanding of what we were talking about. And I agreed with that. And so I reached out at his request to Minister Freeland, Minister LeBlanc, Minister Duclos, those responsible for intergovernmental relations, finance, and health. So Minister Freeland, Minister LeBlanc, and I are working on what will that roadmap be, what's that pathway to an effective and successful First Ministers meeting in the weeks and months ahead. And of course, other events have got in the way, but I'm confident we'll make progress as long as we stick with it and have a focus on people and the needs of those patients right across the country. So
just finally, it sounds to me like you don't want to have the meeting until you've done some work behind the scenes to know that you're going to have a good outcome. Is that how I should read that answer?
Absolutely. And the Prime Minister has been clear. His initial pathway was, let's have our finance ministers across the country gather and have a discussion. Let's have our health ministers gather and have a discussion. We at the Premier's table say, well, they all report to us. We all know what we want. Let's sit down with your finance minister and your health minister and figure out what is the capacity of the federal government to meet the expectations of Canadians. And I'm confident that if we, all of the people of goodwill that I'm working with now, come forward with a view to making sure that the people that we represent get the services that they expect, we'll be successful. And I think the Prime Minister agrees with that. The challenge is, how do we get there?
Okay, well, that's a positive way to end things, Premier. We'll leave it there. Thank you so much for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you.